Hey there, Ryan Kingslien here, founder of UArtsy. How do you work with ZModeler, this new tool? There's a lot of confusion about how to work with it and, is it a real polygon modeler, things of that nature. In this video, I want to show you how we can create something just like this real simple mechanical piece. But in this simple mechanical piece are a lot of the problems we have to solve in working with ZModeler. One of them is, how do we get this bevel around the outside while at the same time keeping a hard edge here? And then how do we inset this so we get a nice bevel? And then how do we kind of create a hole that is literally a hole, a perfect circle, as well as this little inset right here that just doesn't go all the way? A lot of the problems we need to solve are right in there. So the way we start this is you can select a Polymesh 3D, this little star, and you just come into Initialize. And sometimes I set the res to 1, but we're going to set it to 2 here and just say QCube, because there's some advantages to having this center dot here. And number one, remember, ZModeler is not the only tool in ZBrush. So there are things ZModeler does, but it's not designed to replace something like transpose. So if I need to take this piece, and what I really need to do is kind of squash this down to a thin, long, flat pancake that I then extrude a form out of. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, right? We need to take this small piece, we're going to extrude out, then we're going to pull up, and then we're going to put a hole in the center of it, and then we're going to start and wonder, how do I get that nice bevel while not beveling everything? So I'm going to break this up into chunks. You're going to do it later differently when you are a pro at this, but I'm going to break this up into chunks so we tackle each problem as they would come. The first one is, how do we make this a pancake? And the answer to that is quite simple. You use transpose. Flatten the pancake, right? Not hard, you know how to do that. Control, or just click right here on the edges and you can kind of pull that out. Make sure you have symmetry on, because it does not come on by nature with that polymesh. It just doesn't do it by default. So we can pull this out. Okay, stretches things out. Maybe we want to keep this at the center. So instead of doing it this way, now we know where transpose kind of lacks. So we're going to paint some temporary groups here so we can extrude this out. And the way we do that is we press Alt and Paint. Symmetry is on, and we're going to hover over a polygon face, not the edge, but the face. Select this and say, hey, let's go to QMesh and do the entire poly group. But in this case, this is a temporary poly group. You could have a single polygon, and it doesn't matter, because a temporary poly group is kind of the de facto. So there we go. That's a little bit too far. And make sure you have your model, your image. So I'm going to bring this back in for a moment. Just picture this up off the screen in your mind's eye. I'm going to have it off to the left over here. And we're going to work with perspective in this way. And say that's roughly accurate. Now we need to extrude upwards. So there's a cool tool we can use right around an edge. We hover over an edge and we use bevel. Edge loop complete, and you can just drag out a little form like that. That's pretty neat because it gives us this real simple area we can start to extrude from. So I'm going to create my temporary group by pressing Alt, hovering over it, and QMesh. And again, target is not relevant when you create these temporary groups. And I'm doing something very specific here. I'm creating 3 levels. And the reason why is because I already know I'm going to have this kind of move in and get a little bit offset. And then I also know that I'm going to actually start to kind of create a bit of the bevel in there to see if that works. And we're going to start to move things off. So we've got that created. Now I want to kind of hover over this edge, and I'm going to go into Insert. And I'm going to insert a polygon, an edge loop somewhere right around here. Now we're doing this free form. We're not using the schematic. We are kind of basing it roughly off the schematic. And that's really important because we're just learning. So if we were to put all the pressure of dot by dot, it's going to hamper and slow your learning. I just want to get you problem by problem so that you can work from schematics. So we've got this. Now we kind of hover over a point or a vertice. We're going to select split, and we just drag out. Now it's done on both sides, and now we can hover over a face. We're in QMesh, but this time we're going to say polygroup all, and just push in. Push in until it disappears. Just push in until it disappears. So there you go. You have it. So now if we were to come into geometry and we turn dynamic subdivision on, the first thing that we get is a Q grid of 0, and then we've got some smoothing levels, and let's just turn polyframe off, and that is not going to work, right? So one of the next things that we might consider doing is we'll come to Q grid and we'll set it to 1, because that's what a lot of the tutorials show. But what's the problem with a Q grid of 1? You're looking at it right now. There's a fundamental problem with a Q grid of 1 for the model we're trying to create. If you said it creates this kind of faceting, then you'd be right. That's exactly the problem. But if we go to a Q grid of 1, wow, that's beautiful. That's perfect, right? Everything else is screwed. So what do we do? Well, let's find out, why is this perfect? Let's zoom in. We're going to go polyframe, and notice it has creasing around it. Creasing is handled over here in this sub palette, but you can also crease things yourself. In fact, it's one of ZModeler's features. So let's come in here. Let's hover over a face, press the space bar, and you can see there's a crease option. Crazy. Voila. And then if we just click a face and crease it, well, what do you know, right? Let's try creasing the polygroup all. And that's kind of cool. So we've got kind of an interesting option for creasing. So maybe if we come through and we say, let's turn dynamic off, and we just temporary paint all of this. Did you get the whole thing? Polygon face, crease. Does that work? Well, not really, right? Because of the way creasing works, it's from this polygon face, it's getting everything else. So we need to go a little bit more old school, or at least it's easier to go a little bit more old school. The only other thing I might consider is, let's hover over a face, and or an edge, and is there a crease that we can apply to a complete edge loop? Looks like there is. So again, I'm hovering over a face, crease, edge loop. And there you go. Now that's pretty nice, right? But is it going to work across to this edge? Voila. Pretty cool. So now we come into dynamic, turn our polyframe off, and notice our first success. We were able to get this really nice edge while at the same time maintaining the hard quality. So now I actually don't need to go in and show you the old school approach, but I'm going to anyways, just in case you ever have kind of a problem with this. So I'm going to turn polyframe or dynamic off, and let's just backtrack before that was done. And let's open up Crease palette. We can do it with visibility. That's the way it used to be done. So we would go in and say hover, we would just show this kind of group, or let's grow that selection, and then we would say crease. And that would do the same thing that edge loop did, and then we had to come through and say Control Shift click, hide all of that stuff, hide all of that, and then you crease this as well. And now if I come into dynamic subdivision levels, I've got a very similar result. Two ways, but ZModeler is actually going to be a little bit easier in my book for us to accomplish that. Now we still have this edge to do. So we know we have two ways. We can do it with visibility, and we can do it with an edge loop. So let's try those and see. We're hovering over its crease, and it's even telling us what it's going to do. And then we can go dynamic. And we don't have too many problems here because there's no smoothing or anything happening, but this could be problematic for you. It could definitely get to be a problem. So let's just work with this for a moment and continue on with our model. So I'm going to select this polygon face, press Alt, 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 and I'm going to paint a little selection. I'm going to unpaint those. Hover over a face and switch to move. And remember, it's a temporary group, so our target is irrelevant. But we do need some Z symmetry in here. Let's just say single face. Oh, look at that. Brilliant. Control W and do that again. So I got a little bit of extra poly grouping in there I didn't really need. And now I'm just going to undo that and start over. So this way we can kind of push that piece in and get a pretty decent result, right? Now, one of the problems we have is this kind of bevel happening down here. How do we want that to be kind of terminated? Well, right now it's functioning quite well, but perhaps this edge or this vertice needs to move down a little bit. So if we can kind of slide that vertice, note I'm using slide, not move. That way it's not horrible what happens. Okay, it's pretty good. You know, we've got it rough approximation. This thing could be, you know, a little bit bigger. So why don't we see if we can try something really crazy, because remember, it's not just ZModeler. So I'm coming into this ClipCircleCenter. I'm going to drag this out, Control Shift, ClipCircleCenter, and then I press Alt before I lift my pin. Okay, drag that out, and first I try to get it symmetrical, so there's some work to make that happen. And then, ta-da! Did not press Alt. So now I press Alt so it goes transparent, and there you go. Alright, now we got one more thing to do, right? We got this little deep little guy down here to work on. So we come into our edge loops, and let's say we've got a nice little edge loop here, so I'll hover over an edge and I'll say Insert. And kind of get it close. You know, there's a lot of smoothing happening. And then I will select these polygon faces. So let's turn dynamic off for a second. Oh, we're super close. Let's undo that. I'm going to come in here, and then let's just give this a little bit of breathing room and turn dynamic on. Okay. So now I've got some breathing room in there, and that's not kind of crazy. I'm hovering over a face, temporary mask by pressing Alt. Press the space bar, go to QMesh. And I'm just going to paint up. And as I paint and push up, we reach this point where it just kind of merges in. And it does all that beautiful work for me. Too extreme though, right? Because if we look at our reference, it's a little bit less. That's not a problem because it's really just a matter of where that upper edge loop is. So now I need to hover over this edge loop. I need to move it. See if I can move the entire thing right. Can't move the entire thing. Can you push and pull it down just with a little mask and some transpose? There you go. And we still got our temporary mask in there, so we just push up until it kind of snaps. If you go too far, it'll try to find some way to kind of empty itself, to close something. So we just go a little bit, we just don't go that far basically. Turn dynamic on, and you're good to go. Now, looks like we need some creasing, right? To kind of get that edge, some creasing right in here and some creasing in these individual parts. So can we just come to this edge and crease? It starts to take over the whole thing, so you got to be a little mindful, right? We're going to hover over that edge and just say edge loop partial, and then it doesn't go so far. Now there's some fuzzy logic in how far it goes, so you got to remember that. There's some fuzzy logic in terms of whether it's going to go all the way or what it's going to accomplish. I'm going to undo. And then let's get the other side. Okay, so symmetry worked. We have the other side, and we're ready to go. Now, let's see. Maybe we put dynamic on, and let's say insert and insert to kind of close that off a little bit, make that a little stronger. Or what if we insert along the top? There you go. So our little piece built in 15 minutes, covering a lot of the problems you're going to have in ZModeler. So a lot of this is all stuff that you'll experience. Now the only other thing I'll add, so now if you want to get started, go jump into ZModeler. You don't need to watch the rest of this. The only thing I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time doing something ad hoc, see if I can put a little bolt in there, right? So now, again, head on out, check out your own stuff, and start playing with this. And remember, QGrid at 0 was really the key thing we relied on to get the look of our model. And then creasing was an incredibly valuable tool for us. So part of our process with ZModeler is remembering the rest of ZBrush. Remember creases. Okay, and dynamic subdivision doesn't exist by itself. So all of that stuff that you already know, that's been part of your ZBrush experience for so long, still so incredibly valuable to you. All right, now I'm going to try a few more ad hoc approaches, a couple of ad hoc approaches, see if I can get some hole in here. You know, I mean, I know how to do it, but what I'm trying to do is see if I can do it in a way that it kind of gives you another tool. So I used Inset, and I dragged out a small little inset there, right? And then I'm just going to click the back sides so it duplicates that effort. And then let's turn dynamic off for, well, that's a bit of a problem. See, now when it gets so small like this, finding that is going to be a problem. So you can see it. It's right there. There we go. Now I'm going to switch to QMesh, and I'm going to drag all the way down, and see if it did. It connected. Cool. Bada, bada bing. Let's go F for framing that. And there we go. So we got ourselves a nice little hole that's going to kind of puncture in there. It's not exactly a perfect hole, but we kind of saw how to adjust that before. But we can also come in and see maybe we can insert an edge loop. So maybe there's some kind of edge loop we can kind of add in there. So we're going to turn dynamic off, and you see what I'm doing here is just inserting an edge loop. And that's going to help start to kind of keep that a little bit cleaner. Now, it has problems here. I'm hovering over an edge. But over here, it's going to be much easier. So that first time that you draw it, maybe we don't go so far, right? Turn dynamic on. And there. We've got a couple of little insets. Now, we've got a couple more things to do to kind of figure this out. How do we get this to behave so that it's more of a circle? But let me show you, instead of working with ZModeler here, let me show you how you can solve this if none of these ZModeler tools work and you're under crunch and you need to get something. Because there's a really crystal clear way for us to accomplish this. What we need to do is get out of ZModeler. And we need to turn this into a polygon mesh that we can actually sculpt, that we can divide, and things like that. So what I'm going to do now is come over here to Dynamic Subdivision. I'm going to say Apply. So I'm going to convert this beautiful crystal clear shape into no longer dynamic subdivision, actual subdivision levels. Notice nothing changed. It's beautiful. It's amazing how this thing works. It's just a fantastic job. But also keep in mind, how many subdivision levels do we have here? And how do we have now? How many do we have now? So I have added 2 subdivision levels. That means I start with 1 plus 1 plus 2. As soon as we apply it, we're getting 3. Now, if we turn polyframe on, we actually see the polygons distributed in a way that keeps our model intact. Keeps our model intact, still using creasing. So now we can divide this model and we will have minimal impact on the actual shape of it. Minimal impact. So it's an actual piece of geometry now. I can go into ClipCircleCenter. And I can just make holes, right? I want to make them larger. I want to make them kind of cover that entire area. Just boom. There you go. Done. So we didn't need to adjust ZModel or anything like that. We now have this crystal clear piece. It's not an enormous amount of polygons, but if it is, I mean, we're at 12,000 right now. If that's huge, what do? You decimate it. And then you can apply it to your model. You can use it as an insert mesh brush or whatever. But I hope you enjoyed this 23 minutes of me walking you through just one fundamental, one look at ZModeler's fundamentals. Hope you enjoyed. Happy ZBrushing. Make sure you check out what we're doing at UArtsy. Make sure you check out my CERT program. If you're depending on when you're watching this, registration is open now. So head over to uartsy.com or over to ZBrush4r7's.com. And let me know, check me out on Facebook. I'd love to see what you guys are doing. I think you can post to the wall there. I'm not sure what the settings are. But drop me a line, leave a comment and something. I'd love to know, how the new features are working out for you.